Hey, Brian Smith, I don't know what your official title is, but I call you a community activist or advocate or something like that. And I'll say I met you through a series of you testifying and talking in public spaces like City Hall. And I've also met you and seen you in action at Faith United Methodist Church and have seen some of your pieces on Facebook and, kind of like that. And that's my general introduction thing I mail to you guys. And then you'll go from there. Whatever you want to share is your game.
Yeah, I think you and I had our first conversation at the ACLU annual meeting a couple years
ago. Oh, okay. Well, see, you got a better memory than me.
Sometimes it works.
It's all good. So yeah, I tell you, this is good. I was watching your banner on Facebook between Jack and the other guy on there, Brian. It was interesting.
Yeah, Chuck. Chuck's an interesting guy. He runs that Omaha or that Forgotten Omaha webpage.
Okay.
So he all the time he talks about Omaha's buildings that got knocked down and all the history we lost and this and that. He doesn't seem to see the connection between the way that Omaha tears everything down to build it back up and the commercial real estate development, TIF, and all that sort of thing.
Wow. So yeah, I've been following that. One of the things I kind of sprung on y'all, and I'm going to talk a little bit about our mission statement, kind of do a little self-braggadocious on more up front why this is important to us. But one of the things that we are trying to do, and I think when Jack brought this to our attention as a board years ago.
Comment, like, and share.
Boy, this is the first. It is live. I can see it now. We're ready? Okay, we're up on that time. Welcome to Moore's Community Forum, Facebook Live and Zoom Live. This is a Moore sponsored event, conversation, and we call it also an engagement session. Moore stands for Movement in Omaha for Racial Equity for a nonprofit organization. Our mission is an anti-racist organization fighting for racial equality and equity in communities through engagement, education, and advocacy. I'm Byndon, your host. And in doing this session, I'm going to ask the participants, the guests, a number of questions and so on, as well as I'm going to hopefully moderate the event so that we can get as many comments and questions in. One of the things my role as a facilitator is to talk about and help us talk more about the TIF, tax increment and finances. We have invited two community members to talk about the situation in Omaha and raise awareness about the impact on low income and people of color and the sleight of hands that the city have used in terms of its rewarding the TIF to their friends and capitalist cronies. Some of you might question my use of words, but millions of dollars are slowly being siphoned off of potential tax funds intended for urban areas and mainly aimed at those communities of color. And this has been going on for many years. I would like to offer Brian Smith, a long-term community advocate who has challenged the public and private institutions. I met him originally at an ACLU event, and I've seen him at a number of public gatherings where he was challenged and spoke truth to power on many occasions. And I will give him a chance to introduce himself as well as some of his expertise and talk briefly about himself in that area and also why he's so passionate about the topic. The second guest is the founder of Policy Research and Innovation, which he recently changed their name to Moore. And Jack Dunn is a longtime Progressive Omaha member and have been involved in many land use research activities, as well as we would be remiss by not having Jack at the table because he's the one who originally raised the TIF issue to our board many years ago. So we're kind of excited that he could be here. And he's also authored a paper on the topic. He's raised these arguments about the slow misappropriation of tax dollars over 7 or 8 years to our board and elsewhere. So we thought this would be a timely time to talk about TIF, as well as I noticed that Brian Smith has had a number of pieces in Facebook and different places in the media portion. So we thought these two guys would be the perfect individuals to help raise that. So first, Brian, can you first provide a brief introduction of yourself? And then also, Jack, would you do likewise? And then I will raise a few questions and open it up to the audience. So tell the listening or viewing audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ajamal. I appreciate the chance to be here. So I'm, I guess, honored to be called a community advocate or a community activist. My main political philosophy is nothing about us without us. To extend that out, nothing about us without us can be for us. I'm a believer that we have to have not only representation, but active participation in our communities. So over the years, I've worked in banking, I've worked in marketing, advertising, branding, I've worked in sales. But as a community member, I've also run some high profile event series, the TEDx Omaha series. So I did that for about 8 years. I got to identify a lot of the things that were happening in Omaha. And one of the people that stuck out to me as I watched a lot of TED Talks was a guy named Benjamin Barber, who wrote a book, Why Mayors Should Rule the World. And he got me very interested in how cities work, how they grow, how they operate, how, what sort of factors affect a city. And I got really just kind of hooked on finding out how cities work. 4 years ago, we had a mayoral election. If that election had turned out differently, I would have been named Omaha's first chief innovation officer. And part of that role would have been to create a resident engagement program, to initiate a public data portal where the city could share public data to the people. Right now, you have to make public information requests through the city clerk or the county clerk, wherever you're trying to get that information. And so one of the things that I've done over the years is try to find out actual data information from the city or from the other government bodies to identify what's happening and why and who's responsible, and then to share that information.
I'm going to come back to some of that, but yeah, a little bit more about you, and then I'm going to move over to Jack, so I want to get into this quickly as we can.
Absolutely. Perfect.
Jack?
Well, I'm Jack Dunn. I've been a progressive activist, you might say, since the Vietnam era. I was active in the anti-war movement back in the 60s and early 70s in Madison, Wisconsin. From there, I have done a number of things, which I won't recount because it would seem like I was just job hopping. I moved to Omaha because the woman that I got interested in happened to live here. We ended up getting married after about 6 months and still are. That's how I ended up in Omaha. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. What got me back into progressive activism was the invasion of Iraq. And that, to me, was the definitive proof that protests accomplish nothing, really. Because millions of people protested around the world against the invasion of Iraq. No effect. Had no impact whatsoever. Back into progressive activism. So I continued doing other types of institution building. I helped build the film festival, the Omaha People's Film Festival, which went for a number of years in the old building that's now a bank on 38th.
Yeah, you have a echo coming through there a little bit too.
I can hear somebody talking. I don't know what that is. It's nobody on my end. People's Film Festival, which went through a number of years in the old. Anyhow, I've been a progressive activist for a number of years. I founded the early version of this organization back in 2009. I'm still with it, although I'm not as with it as I would like. I do what I can.
Yeah, we're having I think it's the echo from the Facebook Live or something, because there's something going on there where it's doing that. Yeah, that's what happens. So we have to do some technical difficulty changes up here, or let's say do a audible. So go ahead, Jack. Go ahead.
That's about it. My interests are eclectic. I have an interest in science, music, theater, politics, and sort of there's a few things that I don't have an interest in. And I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, good. Well, I wanted to start off in terms of the questions by asking each one of your questions related to the content of TIF. And I know that it's been in the media and so on. And first, Brian, more when they advertise the event, we use the link and so on to talk about it as a form of racism. And I would like to ask you, both of y'all, maybe if you could critique that. Some people see TIF as a pure economic issues, but we see it as related to poverty and race. And so I wanted to have you weigh in on that. What do you think about that, the way we framed it from your vantage point? Brian or Jack?
I'll take the lead on that, just because I don't have that much to say about it. I think it's fairly clear that if you consider that just about everything in the United States is racially biased, which I think is a very defensible proposition, then it's not hard when you start looking to find a racial bias in tax increment financing. One aspect has to do with where the TIF proposals end up being accepted, which is largely downtown, to some extent to North Omaha, which is gentrifying it at the moment, and the people who benefit from tax increment financing have little to do with the community. They are developers. They think they run the community, and of course, in many cities that is the case. The real estate interests do run most cities, but they don't benefit the vast majority of the population. So, Ryan, I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you. I think one of the things that I want to stress to anyone listening is that TIF is a way to take public wealth and transfer it to private hands. That in and of itself is, because you can't have a community without race and class, or you can't have capitalism without race and class. Any opportunity to take public money and to transfer it to private wealth is at the detriment of the community. One of the things that we need to look at when we're looking at tax increment financing is, where does that money come from? And in this instance, it comes from property taxes. If you look at your property taxes, 55% of your property tax, if you live in Omaha Public Schools District, goes to Omaha Public Schools. When you start taking away that money, defunding Omaha Public Schools, you have to look at the effects, which is to defund Omaha Public Schools. They don't get any tax increase for 15 years. You have to look at the makeup of Omaha Public Schools. 75% of Omaha Public Schools are people of color. And also another 75% of Omaha Public School students qualify for free and reduced lunch, which means that their families are experiencing what we would generally classify as some level of poverty. So wealthy real estate developers are taking money out of the tax base to pay off their own loans. And it freezes the income for these public schools for 15 years, which is an entire generation of students. So we see over and over who qualifies for TIF money. They generally tend to be wealthy white men, and they're taking money out of the school district, which means that the poorest of our kids are not getting funded. And so, that has effects, long-ranging effects, because every year about $25 million is missing from the Omaha Public Schools budget, because it has been awarded to real estate developers to pay back their TIF projects.
Wow.
I think we have a definite. I wouldn't say even a correlation, but there's a causation here that people are taking money to make themselves wealthy, but doing it at the expense of our kids.
Wow. Most people don't know that. And again, the issue that TIF is one of those evasive thing. It reminds me of back in the day when they gave all that money to ConAgra, and then they snuck out of town in the night at some point. And then when you looked at some of that, what was it 775, the bill? They basically made those corporations took money and then they produced the jobs. There was no oversight. You had incompetent government officials who just didn't monitor that. And now you see that we don't have many of the benefits from those giveaways, programs, so on. So Brian, on your Facebook post, you challenged a comical approval of TIF for the Crossroads giveaway and the way the city council ramrodded it through without genuine community input or oversight. Can you outline your main arguments why those funds could be better spent in the public school system? And moreover, many and I folks don't see public schools as advocating, and I don't see them advocating in this the way you've done it. So give me a little bit of background on those respective questions.
Right. So in Omaha, we do not have any sort of official resident engagement program. And by that, we would mean that there's some sort of substantive way for people to get involved in the issues that they care about at the city level. So at this point, basically what happens is the developers get together with the city planning department, figure out how they're going to present their financing to the planning board, which is made up of nearly everybody who's a real estate developer, who is in contracting, construction, or has received TIF for an organization they work for. And after that little board approves it, they send it to the Omaha City Council. The City Council on the 23rd will have a little public comment period, but then they take a vote that same day. So they are not actively engaging the public in decision making. It's just kind of a venting period. So if you want to come out 1 minute from the vote, you can come talk, and they're just going to make that vote. So there's not really any serious consideration of the people who were affected by this. The school systems, I've chatted with people who are on people who are on the school board, OPS school board, and I also sent, in this case, some information over to West Side School District, because the Crossroads development is in the West Side District 66. The superintendent says, guess what? We're concerned about this because that's how we get our funding. We want economic development in the area, but it's going to hit us for 15 years, and we're not really sure what to do about that. But the problem is that these so-called community leaders are the commercial real estate developers, and it's hard to try to run afoul of them, especially when they're your friends or campaign donors.
So you're in effect saying that the school officials can't advocate against this issue because they're connected politically? I mean, I don't quite understand why. The question also was, how come school officials are not more aggressive on this issue if they've been doing this for a number of years, taking money out of their potential budgets?
I think that's an excellent question, and that's something that the school boards should be answering for.
Okay.
Because they should be advocating for fair funding. And when you look at the way that the city council continually gives out money for TIF projects year over year, it's not little dollars. It's I think over the last, in 17, 18, and 19 combined, they approved $122 million in TIF projects. Right now, there's $1.9 billion in real estate that is not being taxed properly because of TIF programs, and that's just in Omaha.
Yeah.
Now,
Jack, I was going to ask you something similar, but you wrote a paper on what is tax increment financing and why should anyone care, which was an interesting subtitle to that paper. What is the essence of that paper today? You wrote that a number of years ago, and so obviously we have that available, I guess, on our webpage and elsewhere, but what's the essence of that paper?
It's pretty similar to what Brian was just talking about, that it just points out that the tax increment finance program was started back in the early 70s in California as a way, because the federal government was making money available to municipalities and other government entities for public housing, but the feds didn't want to just give money away. They wanted the local government to participate as well and to kick in some money. So the local governments figured out that if they just gave tax rebates, that the feds would count that as putting money into the pot. And it grew slowly from that time, about 1972 or so. And as time went on, real estate developers began to realize that, hey, maybe this is something that we can use. Until it finally got to the situation that we have today, where there are very few projects that are actually beneficial to the public that are used, that use tax increment financing, that are approved under tax increment financing. There's a lot more I could go into, but that's the essence of the story.
You know, the other issue that was surprising to me is that over the years they've had urban renewal, and then as you've seen the Crossroads Mall, at one point there was Fair Acres. There was a conversation about them doing some renovations near UNO and using tax increment finance, and some of the neighbors did not like their exclusive wealthy part of town being treated as if it was sub-blighted and so on. And so those of us who've been around have seen some of the politics of our local government deal with that issue in kind of a haphazard manner. Over the years, I've noticed that the conversation promulgated as public policy without real community input and public input and private input and so on, particularly towards people of color. And the creation of the public funded Omaha Land Bank, I point that as one example that was all white, as one example. Brian and Jack, despite all the advocacy, which is often hard hearing what you do, hard hitting what you do, what can we do to deconstruct some of these issues? And I know, Brian, you just alluded to where these meetings take place really quickly and we don't really have the public input. But what can we do to help open up the floor for community engagement and also make sure that we get more people to talk about TIF and some of these other issues that are going on? So what can you offer to our participants in this segment?
So I'll just kind of jump in for a couple of things. Is that the biggest thing that we can do is elect people who care. And that's not about caring about the budget, but caring about you and caring about me, because we do not have a resident engagement program. We need one, and the only way to really get that one is to elect a mayor and city council members who are going to have regular meetings with their constituents in public and bring these items up before there is some sort of a vote, before there's some sort of an issue. There are a lot of cities in the U.S. that do what's called participatory budgeting, which means that they have residents of their city who are engaged in determining the city budget. Boston even puts $1 million aside for teenagers. So
oh, wow.
high school students get to allocate $1 million of real money to the programs they care about. And they have to go through a program. It's with city officials, with their school administrators. It's talking about prioritizing what they want to do for the community. We don't have that in Omaha. We have a mayor who specifically likes to shut people out because that's how she accumulates power for herself. And I think it's probably worth stating here that when we're talking Crossroads, she's taken $63,000 in campaign contributions from the Crossroads developers over the years. There are 4 council members who have taken contributions from the Crossroads developers, and so they're the ones who are looking to dole out this money. But their campaigns and their jobs require them to take money from from these real estate developers, which actively prevents us from having substantive action, community action on this.
Good. Jack, equally the same question. What can we do to get more people to engage in public policy issues in our local government from your vantage point?
It would be useful if the issues were made available, made public, or made available to the public. And that's sort of a combination of things. There's the media in town, which, like all media, which all profit-based media, mainly is looking for how to make money. And so the more exaggerated stories, the more glaring problems that they can point out, the better. As the old saying goes, if it bleeds, it leads. There's very little in-depth analysis of what's going on in the city. And on that on that note, I would like to mention that I think in the past year, there's been a bit of an improvement in the media. Even the Omaha World Herald has been carrying some decent stories amongst all the rest of them. And there's this monthly magazine, The Reader, which I've just noticed just in the past 2 months has been carrying excellent analysis. I would like to put in a plug for them. And there are a number of different web pages and Facebook pages that, if you know where to look, will keep you informed on things. I'm working with a group called Code for America that is considering putting together a web page where you could just, which would be a one-stop shop, where you could go to that web page and select what issues you were interested in and where you could find information on it for local purposes.
Good. Well, folks, I think that kind of exhausts the questions I had. And what I wanted to do is throw it open to other people, feedback or any interaction between the two guests, hosts, whoever. But what are some things that are on your mind that we should be dealing with to deal with TIF, and particularly the TIF that is going to be voted upon within the next week, Brian? Is that what you said? When is the vote coming up from the city council?
February 23rd. Yeah, so it's coming up.
So
what time of day?
Well, city council meets at,
2 o'clock?
2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. So if you can schedule yourself off work and hustle yourself downtown, you can have a few minutes to chat.
Good. So at this point, it looked like we're not live streaming. We had Jaquila is our public. We are recording this, so this is something we can put on our on our webpage. And one of the things we're looking at in the future, this is our first time doing this, so we're going to look at hopefully finding the right program and being able to pull this off, because there are a lot of issues related to race and class and things that we've been working on in Omaha that have not gotten attention. And again, when we made the transformation with our name, we looked around and didn't see a lot of nonprofits who had anti-racism, race equity, in light of all the crazy stuff that's been happening in our society, both nationally and locally. So we want to make that front and center and have authentic engagement and conversation. So want to just let people know what more is about, and you'll hear a lot more from us coming up. We also have, I think, an open forum coming up like at the 25th, where we just want to have a listening session where people can share things. So there'll be a number of things we're going to be involved in to help us bring some of these issues to light in the community. Other feedback, other reactions. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask if there's a way to make this more palatable and publicize things like this, because I think to the average person, like, we understand this, but we have to figure out a way to translate that to the masses, which are lower middle class, the poor people, and help them to understand how to mobilize and what this means for them. Because I guarantee, like, I know churches in the West Side District. I know people who live there who, if they knew about this, would be extremely outraged. So if we could figure out a plan to mobilize people and then get some real results, even if, it's kind of cold to be protesting, but even just to get the word out there with maybe even a call to action or something, because I do plan to show up. I work for myself, so I do plan to show up February 23rd, and and by all means, pretty much filibuster. They'll, they always cut me off, but I was emailing them this morning about 5 a.m. too, so they know who I am. But Brian, it's really disheartening that we pretty much know, they're not going to take anything that we say into consideration. They're going to have a vote right then and there. So I guess what's our strategy? How can we be more effective?
Well, I think we saw that too with the juvenile justice issue, is that when people had an opportunity for, make public comment, that was at their vote. And the only thing that kept that whole issue in the public consciousness for the 18 months after that was people causing a ruckus, getting out there and utilizing those public meetings, those weekly meetings where they just normally go through and do their roll call votes, but to utilize those to talk about those topics. And they did not like that. They didn't, they considered it done, finished business, and they wanted us to move on. That's kind of the issue that I'm trying to figure out right now is community organizing. Omaha does not have that Chicago style community organizing where people will get together, have these, have conversations face to face, and take action. And that to me is one of the disheartening things about Omaha, is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of coalescence around these issues, and for us to lead on the conversations. Some of our legislators are trying to do that, but it seems like they're kind of one-person parties, even though they've got people behind them. But where are the 1,000 phone calls that we need? Where are the people showing up to flood their elected representatives to get them to do something? I just don't see that taking place, and I would love to know if we do have organizations that are taking that direct action.
Yeah, very good. One of the things that I was going to share is that some kind of way we got to build up nonprofits to do nonprofit work or do more engagement, particularly with this COVID-19, because again, a lot of it, we can't do the in-face things like we used to, but it's possible they can set up these Zoom meetings or these Facebook Live and then make it open to the public. And again, there's ways you can avoid Zoom bombing also, but part of the concerns is that people are so disconnected. And again, if you're going to take people's money, whether it be taxes through property tax, sales tax, car tax, vehicle tax, what do you offer them in return? And so one of the things that we'd say is for them a chance to engage your public and elected officials. And in the last few years, I've been somewhat amazed at the lack of face-to-face contact as compared to years ago, where you got some elected officials never been in their district. I'll point to the school board as a good example where, when was the last time you seen a town hall meeting where it was open and not overly rehearsed, or the same thing with other elected officials. So if you represent a constituents, then how come you're not out there? And I think this TIF is a good example where, and clearly I think your point's well taken. How do you demystify it? How do you make sure the average person know about this? And there are a lot of people in the city who have no clue about these backroom deals or conversations on TIF and elsewhere. So we need to do a better job of getting that out there and have real participatory democracy. So, that's one of the things. Jack, going back to your paper, you have a TIF database. What's that all about? What is that TIF database that you have? What is that? What did you do? How did you come to collect that? And what is that?
There is a website that it's based on the information found in the Nebraska Department of Revenue. It turns out Nebraska has some fairly good laws about public information if you can figure out where
you said that's some good laws.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, go ahead.
If you can figure out where to get it and then record it or whatever. The Nebraska Department of Revenue has a list of all of the tax increment financing projects in the state of Nebraska. That list is updated each year. As a matter of fact, we're getting close to the update date. And about 3 years ago, I worked with a group of programmers, the primary one in this case being Jay Hanna, who took it on as his own project. There we go. He decided to create from the information that was in the Department of Revenue a graph of how much taxes were being siphoned away by tax increment financing. So in the one that we have displayed in front, it turns out the green level in the charts indicates the amount of taxes that were paid. The red level indicates the taxes that were refunded to the developer. And so far this covers 3 years, even though it goes back to 1992. It's been updated every year for the past 3 years, and it will be updated again shortly. And what you can see is that there's quite a bit of money that has been refunded to developers, and very little money in tax increment financing that has been paid by the developers.
So Jack, or Brian, explain this a little bit different. In other words, the red means how much money they got back and how much they paid. So in other words, they got more money back than what they paid in the system. Is that what we're showing here on here? The red and the green numbers? Because I don't quite understand.
Right. So the green money, or the green is the taxes that groups like First National Bank and Mutual of Omaha and Gallup have paid back to the county for increased property taxes.
Okay.
The red is money that we are essentially, the city or the county in this effect is refunding back to the developers to pay off their loans. So what happens with this tax increment financing is essentially the property tax that is paid to the county, to the city, to the school districts, to everybody is frozen for 15 years. Then the corporation here actually gets pays, it's kind of a fake, a false transaction, because they pay their increased taxes to the county, which then turns around and refunds it to pay off loans that developers take out for their businesses. So that's why we have this issue where the city can claim that, hey, look, we don't have any. This has no effect on the schools because they're getting the same amount of taxes that they were getting 15 years ago. Well, they should be getting taxes on the full amount, because
Okay.
if the mayor just last year she built an addition onto her house. So in 2020, she built an addition. In 2021, her taxes went up, which is how it should be, because she's got property that's now worth more money. What TIF does is it lets these commercial real estate developers build an addition, but not pay any increased taxes for 15 years.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing, because sometimes when you're looking at all these numbers, especially these big numbers that are beyond my income level, it's like, what are we talking about? And so it's very good to demystify it again, to deconstruct it, because again, when as Malcolm likes to say, make it plain. And when you make it plain, it's very much apparent to opinion in our community. So yeah, this is interesting to see that. One of the things that I know that we didn't have our link to our Facebook Live in one sense and so on, but one of the questions I'm going to throw out to you is, what can we do, going back to this TIF thing in this conversation, after they vote and so on? What can the citizens or the residents of the community do about this whole process if they want to change it or whatever? Do we have to go to the legislative, or to unicameral rather? How do we deal with this, particularly if we already know things are going to happen a certain way, which they have on some of those previous votes?
Jack, do you know if I thought there was a bill before the legislature right now that allows cities to put some requirements or some qualifications on their TIF projects. I didn't know if you're familiar with that.
I am not.
Okay, I'm not either. I just caught a little bit of wind on the core issue. The core issue we have to talk about is, why does TIF exist? And at some level, the original level, it's to improve the amount of development in blighted communities. North Omaha, South Omaha rarely get TIF. It's downtown, it's midtown. I mean, if you look at the Blackstone district, they've received not only TIF money, but they also have occupational tax, or is that the special use tax, entertainment district tax, whatever it's called. Same thing in the that development in North Downtown, occupational tax. So if you go out to dinner, you pay for your meal, you pay for sales tax, you pay for restaurant tax, you pay for this occupation tax or entertainment zone tax. And so what we see here is just a continuation that these developers are getting other people to pay for their development. We need to put pressure on folks to get back to the core. Like if we're not using TIF for affordable housing, and we also don't have a definition of affordable housing in the city's master plan. If we're not using it for issues like that, or to build back areas of our city that have been neglected by these same developers, there's no reason for us to have this program. It's just taking public dollars and making private individuals wealthier.
Wow.
That,
When I was Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was one of my questions. Is there could we, because now I'm thinking like, could we use this to our advantage, especially in Northeast Omaha, Southeast Omaha, and take advantage of TIF to provide affordable housing? Because if we don't have to pay the taxes for 15 years, why
Exactly
not?
right. Exactly right. Now, Justin Wayne, this last year, and you might have seen this on the ballot, is that there was a move to increase the number of years from 15 to 20 for what they would call extremely blighted zones. I supported that, which it surprises people when I complain about TIF. My complaint about TIF is not the use of it, but the abuse of it. Because we're looking at this project here, where two of the wealthiest developers in our city are trying to get the City of Omaha to kick in 16% of the cost of their project. They're trying to get $92 million out of the City of Omaha. They don't need $92 million of public money between the $79.4 million that they're trying to get from TIF and the 12.5 that Stothard has already promised them in redevelopment bonds. The developers figured out this is free money, and they're going to take it. The issue that we need to raise on here is that they're defunding our public schools. They're taking money away from our kids and from our teachers, and and making sure that wealthy people who can afford a $550 million project can, this mega block that they're going to continue to build. It's just the whole argument that TIF relies on is what's called they call it but for, and they say if not, basically we wouldn't build this project but for TIF, the public involvement. Well, in my book, if you want you want us to pay 16% of your project, the people should have 16% ownership.
Right. Really?
They're not going to take that, right? If we should pay for it, we should own it.
Right.
Plus, that but for clause is pretty elastic. It turns out that all they really have to do to make the claim that they wouldn't go ahead with this project but for the TIF money is to pinky swear that, as a matter of fact, they wouldn't go ahead with the project unless they have the TIF money. There's no accountability there. There's no rigorous determination of what would make a project need the TIF. It's very poorly done.
Yeah, these developers are pretty bad at their job if they can't make this work without public money.
When I was on the board of Mercy Housing Midwest for a number of years, and I remember hearing about TIF there for the first time, where you had the religious orders who was trying to do urban renewal or build houses in North and South Omaha, particularly more in North Omaha with Holy Name Housing. They used it a lot. But what I found strange at those board meetings is how well the folks who got some kind of subsidies, because they were obviously wasn't sure if they're going to get all their money back. And again, I didn't understand all the details. Then you fast forward years later, you got these major corporations getting money out of the public till, but then there's no accountability. And again, I like that aspect. If you're going to use TIF, use it for something good or help deal with affordable housing. Brian, I'm going to ask you a question related to how come we haven't defined affordable housing? I mean, is it that deep? I mean, can't they go get a dictionary or go to another city and define that? Why are people reluctant to talk about affordable housing, and particularly in this pandemic when you got people who are having a hard time paying their rent?
Because they can't make any money off of it.
Yeah, I mean, we have people getting evicted right now when it's 20 to yesterday was 20 degrees below zero. And you get people putting out the street. A lot of it is because our elected officials just don't have the courage to take this on. They don't, everybody will talk about middle class, but nobody talks about the poor. Nobody talks about the working poor. Nobody talks about the issues that are at the core of it. We like to let our, but if we get beyond our real estate developers and get into our landlords and residential property owners, I mean, they make an enormous amount of money and make a lot of contributions, a lot of campaign contributions. They don't want this to be upset.
So you're saying, if I'm hearing well, that they're afraid to use the term affordable housing and particularly it aimed at low income people, so because they can get in trouble?
Well, I mean, if we start talking about the real roots of our problems, I mean, you look at this project, this Crossroads project, and we're looking at the city wants to put $92 million into it. When's the last time the city put $92 million into poverty alleviation programs, into eviction prevention, into getting people getting these jobs located where people live? I mean, the city, the politicians won't talk about I mean, the poor people's campaign is still going on. It's 55 years in, and we still haven't gotten to that point where our politicians are ready to stand alongside the people who are struggling and people who are unemployed. I mean, a couple of years ago in her State of the City address, Mayor Stothert says she was very happy about the unemployment rates amongst African Americans in North Omaha, which is double the general population, and she's happy about this. That's that issue of we're just containing and maintaining. We're not actually out to improve anything.
Wow. As you said that, Brian, one of the things that I found somewhat disheartening is you have a school of social work at UNO, and they don't have a mandatory course on poverty. You don't have to take a course on poverty and the conditions that people go through in our community to get an education degree, or even the race relation class or diversity classes are watered down, or, you'll see some of these courses, they don't use the term racism or race equity or white supremacy. And so it's hard for us to solve some of the urban issues in Omaha and nationwide when we don't have people who have the wherewithal, the skill set. And you would think with 15% of our state population, or maybe 20 or more, who are low income and fighting some of those basic issues of housing, utilities, you would think our elected and public officials, as well as our academicians, will use this to help bring capacity for us to care for each other a lot more. So this TIF thing is all related to our lack of not having a poverty course or anti-poverty course. Let's put it that way. We don't encourage people to be poor, but one of the things that I discovered years ago, and I think is part of this conversation, is that when we were talking about Medicaid and Medicare and cuts and so on, you see all of these white coat doctors testifying and stuff, but many of the very poor people were not in the room talking about their own benefits. The other issue, and I heard this from one of the U.S. Treasurer person years ago, it might have been under Nixon, he said, if you took every penny that we paid or supported low-income people and gave it directly to them, we wouldn't have poor people. So in other words, there's a lot of people who are making money off the poor and working class in our communities, when some of this money, if you gave directly to them, they wouldn't be poor. They would be middle income people. We spend an inordinate amount of money. And so one of the things, hopefully, as we do more of these kind of discussions, we will talk about why are we using TIF and how is it being misappropriated in certain areas and not going to the intended people or communities or urban areas to help do that. Jack, I was going to come back and ask you, what made you jump into TIF many years ago? I mean, again, it was something you kept bringing to our board and bringing to our attention. Why you, of all people, were you running with this TIF thing where most of us are still stuck on some other issues related to urban renewal? What made you jump into TIF?
Well, the influences of our youth, and in my case, it was sort of my early middle age, tend to stay with us for a while. I worked with the tenant union in Madison, Wisconsin, and in a discussion with one of the organizers, he pointed out that TIF was one of the biggest boondoggles that exist in the housing economy. And that always stuck with me. So when I had an opportunity to bring it to the fore, I took it and tried to let other people know about it. One thing I want to comment on, in addition, is that in the next couple of months, every elected official in the city of Omaha is up for election. That's the mayor, all the city council people. It would be wonderful if there were a clean sweep. Now, that requires some study as far as who looks like good candidates. It also requires some commitment. There were people in I believe there were Republicans during the last presidential election who were going door to door using masks and talking to people and getting people to vote for their candidate. there were Democrat Party groups who decided that that was not a good idea because somebody might catch COVID. This kind of foolishness can't continue. And I'm glad that these elections are nonpartisan, and hopefully people who are dedicated to actually making change put in the time and effort to organize.
Good, thank you. You know, we got about, I think we're down to about the last 10 minutes or so on the program and so on. And one of the things before we give each one of your closing comments and so on, but I wanted to throw out to you is, what are some other issues you see coming up that we need to be concerned about as a community? One of the things that more we're concerned about is bringing people together, doing engagements. We may disagree, we may agree, but we know the importance of bringing the masses together and have them build social capital with each other. So what are some things you think we should be looking at as a community? And again, as we start to bring people together from your vantage point. Brian, what are those hot issues out there we need to think about?
You know, the thing that's simmering right now and about to bubble over is housing. Okay. It's affordable housing, it's evictions, it's the quality of the existing housing stock and where we build. I think there's that's an issue that a lot of people can get behind and understand. I think there's also the issue of making this city a place where people want to live and want to stay. I mean, that's one of the arguments that all the progressive people leave Omaha is because they can't, they know they can go someplace else if they can afford it and not have to put up with this. And so the rest of us are sitting here wondering why we are trying to organize and we can't find enough like-minded folks. I think I like to put also that the focus on the space between running for office and voting, because there's, like you were talking about, the participatory democracy, there's space in between where you can do more than vote, but you don't have to actually be the candidate. And to me, that's, if we're able to highlight those opportunities and push for more inclusion in the process, I think that's kind of an area that would be that'll be helpful, especially as we're looking at how to educate and engage young people.
Good. Jack, what are some of those pressures you think we should be bubbling up or looking at as more and elsewhere to bring people together?
The issues are out there. That's not the issue. The problem is how to do the organizing. And I believe that one-on-one organizing is a good way to start, and then pulling people together that you've started talking with into groups to read books, read studies, to discuss, and then moving from there to having people do the same thing in different neighborhoods with different groups of people. And just expanding that kind of interest and in enthusiasm and investment is what needs to be done.
Right. One thing that I'm always concerned with, and I think it goes back to the initial intro of what MORE is about, is how do you bring those communities and worlds together? We live in an apartheid type city where you have racial groups in certain segments and certain areas, and it's been like that for many years. And we have not seen an inordinate amount of support to deconstruct or at least have integration on a healthy level. And some people may not be aware of it, that the public schools was dragged to court and got whooped about their segregation. And so not only do we have segregated schools in a sense, but we had segregated housing, and we still do. And you haven't seen elected and public officials addressing race issues and class issues on the levels they should. I do know the city just recently hired a diversity director, which was amazing and surprising because they haven't ignored that in many years. They do have a human relations department, but I've not seen them out in the community much, doing much stuff. But again, part of the challenge is hopefully we can get people to, again, what happened in terms of our national agenda last year and then what's happening just recently on January the 6th, set a lot of trauma for a lot of people, because it shows us that we are a divided society and that we need to address that. I want to give each one of you a chance to share some comments or observations as we wind down. I know we have about 8 minutes or so on this recording, but what are some things that you would like to share with the listening and viewing audience related to TIF and elsewhere? So do you whichever one you want to start first? Okay.
Brian, take it away.
Oh, okay, I was waiting for you, Jeff. You know, the takeaway for me is that what I'm trying to do here is, as I'm trying to use TIF as a way to illustrate our priorities, because I'm not going to argue about taxes. I like to pay my taxes because they support the public schools. They support the things that are important to all of us, and that's part of the social bond that we've got. But it tells us that we are continuing our racial and economic problems. I mean, it was when you mentioned the way Omaha is segregated. You know, the suburbs are a form of economic violence. They take, and people leave the city center, and they got theirs. They move someplace where they don't have to deal with the issues of their neighbors, and strip out the city. And we've seen that over and over again, and we see the way that the city is developed and where we put the money, and it goes down to the schools. Again, I mentioned earlier that 75% of OPS students are experiencing some level of poverty, and 75% of the student body is people of color in a city that's 78% Caucasian. We've been our fellow residents have been stripping their kids out of schools and stripping their monies out of the city, and trying to get somebody else to pay for the good stuff. And that's to me, that's kind of the bigger issue here, is that we're looking at using TIF as a way to illustrate that problem. And you can do this with 40 other issues. It comes back down to the fact that people don't see themselves as a part of this city who are responsible for the people around them.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it. Jack?
Well, that's a good note to end on. I think it's very important for all of us to connect with our neighbors, and even in these days, even with our friends, since that's a little more difficult under the circumstances, and be charitable, be kind, listen, do real conversation, real engagement with the people that we're talking with, and find out what the issues are that they're aware of, and begin to consider what can be done on those issues. I have a head full of issues that could be worked on, but I don't know which of those are really the kind that grab other people, that make other people excited. The only way to find that out is by talking to them. What we're doing right now is useful. It's a way to get information out, but unfortunately, we need to work on getting information back as well.
Good. Well, I really appreciate that, Brian Smith and Jack Dunn. I tell you, it's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate y'all coming out and sharing with our audience about some of these important issues of the day. And I would like to encourage other participants and community advocates and activists to go out and help work with the masses to mobilize to transform our city on the hill, because obviously we have a city that is divided, and we also have a city that has a tremendous amount of wealth as well as inequality in terms of that income. And so we also need to get our education institutions to do a much better job of bringing people to the public table of talking about what democracy really is. Sometimes we cannot talk of democracy if you're so poor, you can't go anywhere, you can't afford utilities, you can't afford basic necessities. And in this day and age, no one on this planet should go without food and shelter, because we have more than enough wealth concentrated in the hands of the elites and so on. So again, this is a very important thing, and I really appreciate you coming forward today and sharing with more. And again, I understand our mission is anti-racism, fighting for race equity in the community through engagement, education, and advocacy. So as Brian, as you alluded to, it's not just voting, it's that whole continuum of staying involved to transform that city. And the last point I'd like to close up on, at the end of the day, is we ask the questions of squeeze worth the juice. You know, you hear people talk a good game, but do we have the numbers? Is it evidence-based? Do the people who are recipients of the services, are they satisfied? So again, we have to be very conscious of how do we measure what is outcome and what is success. And oftentimes it should not be from the hands of those who are delivering the services, but those who are receiving it. So I really appreciate what you've done, and I hope that you will both join us again as we do more engagements on these issues of the day, as well as social justice issues that deal with race. So really thank you for being a part of this process today, and hope that you will join us again as we move forward to address these issues. We say thank you very much, and Barocco. So this ends our session, folks. And again, this will be posted on the More webpage, and for folks to go back. And again, each one of the gentlemen here can be contacted if you have any questions or want more information. They're in the public domain, and I think they both have ways you can catch up with them. If not, contact the local folks who know who they are. But thank you very much.
Thank you.